Ever wonder, like, when you see a company's financial report, who's really making sure those numbers are legit? Not just some made-up figures. Like, who's digging deep and ensuring any problems get flagged to the right people, the people who can actually do something?
It's a question a lot of people probably don't think about, but it's so important. And a big part of the answer lies in how auditors communicate with those at the very top, the folks in charge of governance, as they say.
Right, so it's about making sure there's accountability, that any red flags aren't just swept under the rug.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're going deep on today. We're going to unpack ISA 260 revised, which is all about this crucial communication. So for those of you following along at home, we're working straight from the official document. And this standard really focuses on how auditors connect with the folks overseeing a company's financials and its overall strategy.
Like the people ultimately responsible for making sure things are running smoothly and above board, right?
Yeah, think of it as the auditor's direct line to those in charge. It's a vital part of the whole audit process.
For sure. And it's not just a one-way street. It's not just the auditor giving a presentation and everyone else just listening.
No, not at all. It's way more interactive than that. It's a back and forth exchange, a real dialogue.
Got it. So what we're trying to do today is pull out the most important bits from ISA 260, specifically the parts about communicating with those charged with governance. We want to take this potentially dry topic, something that might seem like just technical jargon, and make it clear and interesting. By the end of this deep dive, you'll have a much better grasp of this crucial part of the audit world.
You'll understand the safeguards that are in place to ensure accountability and transparency.
Okay, let's get into it. So, first things first. Why is this communication so vital, according to ISA 260?
Well, the standard spells out the main objectives of this communication really clearly in paragraph 9. Firstly, the auditor has to lay out their responsibilities in relation to the audit of the financial statements. They have to provide a clear overview of what they're planning to do and the time frame. This sets expectations from the get-go.
Okay, so it's like laying down the ground rules. Like, here's what we're going to do, and here's the schedule. Makes sense. What else is there?
The second objective is that the auditor needs to get information from those in charge of governance. They have that high-level view of the company, the environment it operates in, and the potential risks. So it's vital for the auditor to tap into that knowledge.
Right, so it's not just about the auditor telling governance what's up. They need to be actively listening and learning from them, too.
Exactly. It's a two-way street, like we said. The third objective is to give those charged with governance timely updates. And these updates have to be about things that are significant and relevant to their job of overseeing the financial reporting process. It's about keeping them informed about anything they need to know to do their job effectively.
Got it. So if the auditor finds something concerning or unexpected, governance needs to know right away. No waiting until the very end.
Precisely. And the fourth objective is to make sure there's effective two-way communication, a real back and forth. This isn't just checking off a box. It's about cultivating a solid working relationship.
Yeah, I can see how an ongoing conversation would be way more valuable than just like a once-a-year report or something.
Right, exactly. And it's worth pointing out the standard also talks about how this communication helps build trust. It allows the auditor to get a better understanding of the business itself. That's in paragraphs 4A and 4B, if anyone's following along.
Which in the end helps them conduct a more thorough audit.
Exactly. And this benefits those charged with governance, too, because this communication helps empower them to do their jobs effectively, like making sure the financial reporting is accurate and reducing the chances of big errors.
So everyone wins.
Precisely. Paragraphs 4C and 5 highlight that. It's really a win-win situation.
So just to recap, we've got clear expectations, getting that crucial inside knowledge, staying on top of issues as they come up, and building a strong partnership. That's a pretty good summary of why this communication is so important, right?
You nailed it.
Okay, cool. Now, when we say those charged with governance, that sounds kind of formal. Who exactly are we talking about?
It is a specific term. It's defined in paragraph 10A of the standard. Essentially, it refers to the person or group responsible for overseeing the company's strategic direction and making sure it's accountable. They're the ultimate guardians, you could say, the ones responsible for the big picture.
Okay, so give us some real-world examples, like who are these people in a typical company?
Sure, it depends on how the company is set up, but in a public company, it's usually the board of directors, or sometimes a corporate trustee. In a nonprofit, you might have an oversight board or a board of trustees. And in a smaller, privately held business, it could even be the owner-manager themselves, as long as they have that oversight role. The key thing is They're the ones ultimately responsible for ensuring the company is operating ethically and responsibly.
So these are the folks at the top making sure everything's on the up and up.
Right.
Okay, so just to be clear, those charged with governance are not the same as management.
Absolutely not. The standard makes a clear distinction there. Paragraph 10b defines management as the people with the day-to-day responsibility for running the company. While the auditor will definitely interact and communicate with management, ISA 260 is all about that higher-level communication with those charged with governance.
Okay, that makes sense. Management runs the show, and governance makes sure the show is being run properly. And it's that oversight level the auditor focuses on in this standard.
Yeah.
All right, so now that we know who we're talking about, let's get to the what. What exactly does the auditor need to communicate?
Good question. The standard lays out those key matters, starting in paragraph 14.
Okay, so paragraph 14, right off the bat, talks about the auditor's own responsibilities in relation to the audit. That seems like a crucial starting point.
Definitely. The auditor has to be upfront about their role. They need to say what they're responsible for, like giving an opinion on the financial statements. And importantly, what the audit is designed to do and what it's not designed to do. This sets the stage for governance to understand what the audit can and cannot achieve.
Okay, that's important context. And then we have paragraph 15, which talks about the plan's scope and timing. This is more than just a vague idea, right? Like the auditor needs to be more specific than just, we'll look into things.
Right. The auditor needs to give an overview of what they plan to cover and a rough timeline for the process. And they need to communicate any major risks they've identified early on while they're planning the audit.
Okay, so governance knows what the auditor will be focusing on and when. Makes sense. What about the findings themselves? That's got to be a crucial part of the communication.
It absolutely is. That's all detailed in paragraph 16. It covers the significant findings from the audit, and it breaks them down into several categories.
Okay, great. Let's go through them.
One key area is the auditor's views on what they call the significant qualitative aspects of the company's accounting practices.
Qualitative aspects. What exactly does that cover? I'm not sure I follow.
Think of it like this. When you look at financial statements, there are a lot of judgments and assumptions that go into those numbers. Things like the accounting policies the company uses, the estimates they make, and how they present their information. The auditor needs to share their professional opinion on whether all of that makes sense and is in line with the rules and provides a fair picture.
So it's not just about the numbers themselves being right. It's about the story behind the numbers.
Exactly. And whether that story is clear and paints an accurate picture, that's all spelled out in paragraph 16A.
Okay, that makes sense. So what else? What are the other categories of significant findings?
Another important one is significant difficulties the auditor might have faced during the audit. That's in paragraph 16B.
Difficulties. Like what? Give me an example.
Well, let's say the auditor is having trouble getting the information they need. Maybe management keeps delaying giving them key documents, or they're restricting access to certain personnel, that kind of thing.
Right, that would make it really hard for the auditor to do their job properly. And if governance isn't aware of those roadblocks, they might not realize the audit's conclusions could be compromised.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's difficulties. What else?
Then you've got paragraph 16C, which covers a few more key areas. One is any significant issues that came up during the audit that were already discussed with management. This ensures those charged with governance are in the loop. Another is if the auditor is asking management for written representations, they have to tell governance about that too.
Written representations. Just remind me what those are again.
Oh, they're basically formal statements from management confirming certain things about the financial statements. It's a standard part of the audit process.
Right, I remember. Okay, so significant matters discussed with management, written representations. Anything else in that category?
One more thing. If there are any situations that could affect the auditor's final report, that needs to be communicated as well. Like, for example, if there's a limitation in the scope of the audit, if the auditor wasn't able to look at everything they wanted to, that could lead to a modified audit opinion.
Okay, so anything that could significantly affect the auditor's opinion, any disagreements or limitations, that all needs to be communicated.
Right. And then there's a broader category mentioned in paragraph 16D. It's basically a catch-all for any other important matters the auditor thinks those charged with governance should know about. anything that's relevant to their oversight of the financial reporting process, even if it doesn't fit neatly into the other categories.
So the auditor has some flexibility to use their judgment and raise anything they think is really important.
Yeah,
It sounds pretty comprehensive.
it is.
Okay, so we've got all those findings, but then there's also the matter of the auditor's independence, right? That's a separate issue.
Absolutely. That's crucial. Paragraph 17 is all about that. The auditor has to communicate with governance about their independence, including any potential threats to their independence and what safeguards they have in place to address those threats. It's really the bedrock of the whole audit process.
Yeah, if people question whether the auditor is truly impartial, it undermines everything.
Absolutely.
So how does all this communication actually happen? Is it always a formal written report?
Not necessarily. Paragraph 19 and some of the related material, A37, A48, talk about the different forms this communication can take. It could be written, it could be oral, or it could be a combination of both.
So it's flexible.
It is. The auditor has to think about things like how important the issue is, the nature of the company, and how its governance is structured. All of that plays into the decision.
Okay, so lots of factors to consider.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, when would you say written communication is more appropriate?
Well, paragraph 20 suggests that for more significant findings, a written communication is often necessary, to ensure there's a clear record and to facilitate a more thorough discussion.
But oral communication is still important, right?
Absolutely. Oral communication is great for more timely updates, and it helps keep that two-way dialogue going.
So it's about finding the right balance.
Exactly.
And regardless of whether it's written or oral, it has to be timely, right? Those charged with governance need to be kept in the loop so they can act on the information if they need to.
You got it. That's in paragraph 22. Timeliness is key.
All right, so we've talked about the what, the why, and the how of this communication. Now, company governance structures can vary a lot. How does the auditor deal with these different setups?
Yeah, that's a good point. The application and other explanatory materials section has some guidance on this, particularly paragraphs A1 through A8. You've got large corporations with complex governance structures, and then you've got smaller businesses where things are a lot more informal.
Right, so how does the standard account for that?
Well, paragraph 11 and A1 through A4 talk about how the auditor has to figure out who the right people are to communicate with, who are the ones with the relevant responsibilities, and sometimes there might be specific subgroups within the governance structure.
Like an audit committee, for example.
Exactly. Paragraph 12 and A5 to A7, along with A48. Talk about that. An audit committee usually has specific responsibilities for overseeing financial reporting and internal controls. So in those cases, the auditor might have more frequent and detailed communication with them.
Okay, that makes sense. An audit committee is like a specialized group within the larger governance structure.
Right.
And what about smaller businesses, where the lines between ownership, management, and governance might be a bit blurry? Like, sometimes the owners are also the managers, and effectively those charged with governance all rolled into one.
That's covered in paragraph 13 and A8. The standard recognizes that in some smaller entities, the same people might be wearing multiple hats. In those cases, the communication might be less formal, but the basic requirement is still there. The auditor has to make sure that whoever is responsible for oversight is getting the information they need.
Right, even if it's the same people who are also running the company day to day.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the auditor communicating to governance, but I think it's really important to reiterate that it's not just a one-way street. The standard stresses the importance of two-way communication.
Definitely. Paragraph 8 and A37, A38, along with A49, all emphasize that. It has to be a dialogue, not a monologue. And remember, paragraph 9b specifically mentions that the auditor should be actively seeking out information from those charged with governance, because they have a lot of valuable insights that can inform the audit.
Right, it's a partnership. So what kind of things might those charged with governance bring to the table?
Well, they might provide context about big business decisions or events that could affect the financial statements. They might also have insights into potential risks that the auditor should look into more closely.
Okay, yeah, they have that big picture perspective.
Exactly. And then in A51 and A52, it talks about how important it is for the auditor to be responsive to the views of those charged with governance. So if they raise concerns or ask questions, the auditor needs to take that seriously and address it.
It's about being open to feedback and working together.
Right. That makes the whole process more collaborative and ultimately more effective.
Now, before we wrap up, I think we could touch on documentation. Always a fun topic for auditors.
Us.
So, what does ISA 260 say about documenting these communications?
Well, paragraph 24 and A54 are pretty clear about that. The auditor has to document all the important things that were communicated. When it happened, who they talked to, whether it was oral or written. It's all about having a clear record.
Makes sense. Yeah, so they can demonstrate they follow the rules.
Exactly.
Okay, this has been a really insightful deep dive into ISA 260 and this whole idea of communicating with those charged with governance. It's clearly not just a formality. It's a fundamental part of ensuring accountability and transparency.
Couldn't have it better myself. It's a vital link in the chain of trust when it comes to financial reporting.
It really is. So I've got one final thought to leave our listeners with. We've talked about this formal communication between the auditor and those in charge of governance. But what about the role of other stakeholders, like investors, employees, or even just everyday people who rely on financial information? Do they play a role in ensuring the integrity of financial reporting, especially in today's complex world? What do you think?
That's a great question, and it's an important one. I think even though the standard focuses on the specific communication structure, the expectations of those broader stakeholders definitely play a role. Like if investors are demanding more transparency, if employees want to make sure their company is being run ethically, all of that creates pressure for better oversight and reporting.
Right, like the more people care about financial information being accurate and trustworthy, the more important these standards become.
Exactly.
It's all connected.
It is.
Well, on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Hopefully, you now have a better understanding of this crucial communication process and how it contributes to good corporate governance and financial transparency.
And maybe next time you come across a company's annual report, you'll look at it with a slightly more informed eye.
Exactly. And you'll have a better appreciation for the role auditors play in ensuring the integrity of financial information. Thanks for listening.